The clients we work with tend to spend a lot of time trying to find strategies to get to more senior people in the accounts they're working with. And that's something we're able to help them with quite significantly. It's certainly the experience I have in my career, and those are my colleagues too. The reason those companies want to get to more senior executives is because they've worked out that strategic decision-making, politics, influence, and motivation tends to flow from the top through to the front of the business. And so very often that's why they're looking for those strategies. But the things we learn about how to effectively get to people at the top of a business, you know, the rules apply. Whoever you're trying to get to, whether it's a frontline manager, a director of a business, a purchasing manager, the rules apply. So let's talk about some of those simple rules. But before I do that, I just want to talk about appetite, about desire, about the way you feel about making appointments. Because not all of us are cold calling animals. I work with a lot of sales guys who love cold calling executives and mid-level managers, but equally as big a number who really don't like doing it at all and in fact aren't particularly skilled at it. And they tend to look for different strategies to get in front of these people. Either way, the reality is that whoever you are, everyone is a little fearful of making that first call to someone. And it doesn't matter if you're picking up the phone or if you're knocking on the door or if you're just meeting someone for the first time at a cocktail party. The reality is, I certainly still get it. There's a feeling in your gut that you get before that phone is answered. It's something you have to deal with for yourself, and it's a decision about the things that are important to you in your role. I find myself thinking a lot about the impacts of not doing what I'm about to do and that I'm terrified of doing, and that tends to give me the final push to get on and do it. And what I've found, and certainly what our clients find, is once you're over that little feeling in the gut, you know, when the executive picks up the phone or when they open the door, when you first meet them, it's strange how easy it is for us to slip into some of our more natural behaviors and actually build a really effective, engaging conversation with them. Some of you will have to structure yourselves really hard to do this stuff. It's not always easy to make appointments on the fly, to grab an hour here or there to get on and do it. Some of you will need to pull out half of a day or a full day and really just lock yourself in a room and get on with it. You know what? Whatever works for you. There's no right or wrong. You've got to decide how you feel about these things. And if you need a certain environment to pick up the phone and get into these people, then that's the environment you need and you should do it. I'm not going to advocate you stand around in your underpants in a public place and get on and do it, but I think there are certain things that you just need to do to make yourself feel comfortable. And then you just got to do it. Having said that, this isn't all about cold calling. There are a number of different routes to the people you want to get to. We've talked in other episodes as we've looked at the territories you work in and the sectors you work in and the communities that you're a part of, about networking your way and influencing your way into the places where other executives and the people you want to get to exist. There's a movie, I think, that's called 6 Degrees of Separation, and everyone's pretty familiar with that concept. The thought that whoever you are in the world, you're only 6 degrees or 6 human touches away from knowing everybody else on the planet. Sometimes, certainly in particular countries we work in, it can feel like the link's even closer. And in your own sectors and territories, I guarantee you it's true. You're no more than 2 or 3 links away from knowing the people that you're trying to get to. So look hard at those connections and maybe try and create warm reasons to contact these people or get connected to them from other people you do business with. The really successful guys I work with all do what's called reference selling. They're all of them always asking for the next conversation with the next person, either within the account they're dealing with or in the next account. And that's a very simple way of gaining access to the people you really need to gain access to. Reality is, you know, though, at some point it's going to come down to you, a telephone, piece of paper with some notes on in front of you. You've got to pick the phone up and call someone you've never spoken to before. Once you're in that position, I think there are some simple rules, and we certainly see them borne out time and time again. There's a cliche, right? The cliche is that you're supposed to try and be a business person, not a salesperson. It's a cliche, but it's true. The fact is, though, it's very difficult to get your head around what that means. There's some simple pieces of things you can do to really make it work. When you pick up the phone to a new client, maybe try thinking to yourself what you'd say if you were calling someone inside your company. When you call people inside your company, you tend to lose a lot of the bullshit that comes with being a salesperson. And you tend to get down to brass tacks and communicate a lot more authentically. And if there's a key word for me to get through to you in this particular conversation, it's authenticity. There aren't many conversations outside of your sales conversations where you try so hard to simply convince someone that they either need to see you or need to see your product or need to be interested in your product. And I ask a lot of sales guys that I work with what would happen if you just stopped trying so hard, maybe even were prepared to accept that your product might not work in certain situations and might not be right, and communicated that in the conversation you have with someone. What if you called an executive and said, look, I know we've been very successful with clients in your market or your competitors or organizations that I know you deal with. The reality is I've got no idea whether we can help you be as successful by using our solutions and products. But I wouldn't mind the opportunity to find out. My experience is that if you go with that kind of approach, and I'm by no means trying to give you the exact words here, an authentic approach that says we have been successful, it's a familiar level of success because you know of the companies that we've been successful with, but the reality check is until we've been in and diagnosed some of the issues in your business, we don't know if we can help you or not. My experience is that that carries an enormous amount of credibility and weight with the people you deal with. You're not saying you can't help, but you are being honest and authentic enough to suggest that it requires a conversation to find out. That's just good business sense. If you called your own boss, you wouldn't be trying to convince him that certain things were definitely facts. You'd be looking for a conversation and a discussion to decide if those things were facts, and then a commitment after the fact to work through the action plan to establish that they absolutely are facts and can be actioned upon. I'm going to encourage you to do the same in the conversations you have as you make appointments. Think authenticity first. Don't think salesmanship. Stop trying to convince people that they have to see you and start thinking that maybe there's just a discussion to be had about whether or not there's an action plan to be built. And so I tend to think that this approach is pretty good. Reality is there's no right, there's no wrong. You have to use the words that are comfortable for you, the approach that's comfortable for you. But if you're going to try and engage with executives of note, people of influence in organizations, understand they can usually sniff a salesperson, and that the guys out there in the field that are doing the best work, that are most successful in the sales environment, tend to have a vein of authenticity, tend to feel more businesslike, tend to be more prepared to discuss the options prior to trying to drive home the fact that the people have to meet with them. So it's about authenticity, it's about timing, it's about the courage of your conviction, and it's about feeling in your gut that you have the desire and the appetite to make the call to the person you don't know to drive a first conversation. Final point, I guess, on this, and I've asked it a lot, is it's pretty likely that when you pick up the phone to an executive, you're not going to get through to the executive. You're usually going to get through to their assistant or a group phone number or something like that. And I'm asked a lot, how do I get around or over the assistant? Again, there's no right or wrong, and depending on whose book you read yesterday in sales, you'll be told different things. I can only tell you what works for us and what works for our clients. And what's worked best for us, certainly what works best for me in my career, is if you start by losing this attitude of trying to get around or through or over the assistant. Executive assistants particularly actually wield an enormous amount of influence and informal power in organizations, so you could argue that it would be a pretty good thing to be aligned with them. My approach is this. When faced with an assistant, I'm very assumptive and I continue my vein of honesty. So I'll say something like, look, again, here's why I wanted to speak to the executive in question. We've had success in a client like yours. I have no idea if we can replicate the success. Wanted to have the conversation to find out. My next question's important. The question I ask is, maybe you could give me some guidance as to who else I could speak to, as well as the executive I'm trying to contact, in order to understand the real picture. In other words, what I'm actually asking is, tell me about the politics, tell me who's got the influence. But I'm also trying to be relatively assumptive about the fact that the meeting will happen with the executive in question. Does it always work? No. But it gets me a pretty high hit rate, and certainly just by being authentic and honest and open, and not trying to somehow get one over on the assistant, you get a decent level of engagement and at least breed a little bit of familiarity with the people who are close to the CEO or the executive you're trying to get to. So my theme on this is I'm going to encourage you to be authentic and real, businesslike, in the conversations that you have. You don't need to be thinking about how do I get around, get through. Be creative, engage with people at the peer level, believe you have a right to be in these conversations.